Hello, I'm Jessica Harborough, and I come from a family of great detectives. My father was James Harborough, whose father was Hardy Harbor Jackson, Jr., whose mother was Janet Harbor, the first in our family to wear the badge and uniform. The legend goes that Janet once defeated an entire family of bandits on her own with nothing but an empty revolver. Since then, she has inspired my father, my grandfather, and me to grow into seekers of justice. One day my moment finally came. It all started when I was on my way back from the bathroom. I saw James Heartthrob, the guy my best friend Lily Lenz had a massive crush on. He carried a suspicious brown package, glancing around to ensure no one was watching, before hiding it in his locker. Curious, and as the responsible head of the Student Welfare Association, I decided to follow him. I found him in a quiet corner making a phone call, and I eavesdropped. I secured the package. Good job. We execute the plan tomorrow at noon. If it all goes well, we'll achieve our goal and have more than enough money to live comfortably for the rest of our lives. As soon as he hung up, James took out a pair of golden framed glasses. When he clicked them, a holographic display of a building appeared. The building looked familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. What was James planning? Before I could process it all, Lily suddenly appeared. "Hey, Jessica, what are you doing? Come on, the football match is about to start. And James Heartthrob is leading the team. A nothing, let's go." While walking to the field, my mind raced. Something big and evil was brewing, and I had to stop it. At the match, while Lily cheered for James, I snuck out and headed to his locker. Having memorized his password earlier, I opened it. The package was there, but it was empty. However, the wrapping paper had an address and sender's name written on it. Just as I noted them down, I heard footsteps. I quickly hid behind a classroom door and watched as James returned to the locker. He took out his phone, walked back to the corner, and made another call. "We'll have to postpone to the day after tomorrow. I have a date with Lily Lenz. She's really into me, don't worry. The plan is still solid." My stomach sank. Not only was James plotting something criminal, but my best friend was getting caught in his web. I had to act fast. That night I invited Lily over to make prank calls, using the address I'd found. She thought it was hilarious, not knowing my real intentions. Most calls led nowhere, but then one of them connected. "Hey, James, what's wrong with your voice? You sound sick." "No, no, just allergies. I'm still your man. About the evil plan for the day after tomorrow." The guy on the other end laughed and said, "You've lost your mind over that girl you mentioned, haven't you? How hot is she?" I hung up, pretending it was all a joke. Lily, oblivious to the danger, was still fixated on her date with James. The next evening I followed them to the restaurant. Disguised as a waitress, I planned to overhear their conversation, but things didn't go as smoothly as I'd hoped. After a series of unfortunate encounters with annoying customers and being accused by a crying child of pushing him, I was kicked out of the restaurant. James and Lily followed me outside. "What the heck are you doing here dressed as a waitress?" James asked. "I work here." "Well, I did, until I got fired." To my surprise, James handed me $100. Hope this helps. Was this guilt money from his criminal ventures? I needed answers. The next day, I finally recognized the building from James's holographic display, the Texas State Bank. I realized the plan. James and an accomplice, Jack Trades, were going to rob the bank. At noon, I arrived early. To my shock, James and Jack were already there speaking with the bank manager. Before they could make a move, I tackled James to the ground. "What are you doing, Jessica?" Ignoring him, I spotted another man with a gun, tackled him, and tied him up. The police were called, and I felt triumphant until James explained. "Jessica, you've got it all wrong. That device wasn't for robbing the bank. It's a prototype Jack and I developed." Mortified, I realized the man I tackled was a real robber completely unrelated to James. Thankfully, the police praised my bravery and even gave me a badge of honor. The next day I apologized to James at school. "You're nosy and wild," he said, grinning. "But tackling that guy was brave. You're forgiven." Lily and James decided not to pursue a relationship. Years later I became a detective, and James and I reconnected. We dated, fell in love, and eventually got married. Lily, ever the supportive friend, was our maid of honor. Despite a few awkward moments, our friendship remains unbreakable. Life as a newlywed was far from the quiet, idyllic life I had imagined. Sure, James Heartthrob, now James Harborough, was still the same dashing, infuriatingly charming man I had fallen for. But life with him was a mix of excitement, unpredictability, and occasional bouts of chaos. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. After our honeymoon in Paris, where James nearly got us arrested by attempting to investigate a supposedly suspicious waiter, we returned to our small but cozy home in Austin, Texas. I had just landed my dream job as a detective at the city precinct, following in my family's footsteps. Meanwhile, James was working on launching his latest tech invention, a security system he called OptiShield. The system could map and identify vulnerabilities in any building structure using advanced holographic displays, an innovation he proudly claimed was inspired by our high school escapades. For the first few months life felt almost normal. I solved a few small cases: a missing dog, a stolen wedding ring, and James worked late into the night in his home lab. But, as I should have known, normalcy isn't something the Harboroughs are particularly good at maintaining. It all began on a humid Friday afternoon. I had just returned from the precinct, where I'd spent the day dealing with a quirky old man who was convinced his neighbor's cat was spying on him. James greeted me at the door, his face unusually pale. "Jess, we've got a problem," he said. "What kind of problem? Did you accidentally blow something up in the lab again?" "No," he replied, shaking his head. "This is serious. Remember OptiShield? Someone's stolen the prototype." My stomach dropped. OptiShield wasn't just any invention, it had the potential to revolutionize building security. In the wrong hands, it could be weaponized to infiltrate even the most secure locations. "How could this happen?" I demanded, already switching into detective mode. "I don't know," James admitted. "I was working late last night, and when I woke up this morning, the prototype was gone, the back door was unlocked, and there was no sign of forced entry." A chill ran down my spine. Whoever had taken the device knew exactly what they were doing. The first step was obvious: canvass the scene of the crime. James's lab was a cluttered mess of wires, tools, and half-finished gadgets, but it didn't take long to notice the glaring absence of the OptiShield prototype from its usual spot on the workbench. "Who knew about this project?" I asked. James hesitated. "Just a few people, Lily, of course, and a couple of potential investors I met at the Tech Expo last month. Anyone seemed suspicious." He shrugged. "One of the investors, maybe, a guy named Vincent Blackwell. He kept asking a lot of questions about the device's vulnerabilities." Vincent Blackwell. The name alone sounded like it belonged to a Bond villain. I made a mental note to dig into his background later. That evening, as I pored over my notes, there was a knock at the door. To my surprise, it was Lily. She had brought over her famous homemade brownies and an envelope in hand. "I heard about what happened," she said, placing the envelope on the coffee table. "I think this might help." Inside were a series of photos Lily had taken at the Tech Expo. In one of them, Vincent Blackwell was standing by James's booth, chatting with a tall, red-haired woman wearing dark sunglasses. "Who's the woman?" I asked. Lily shook her head. "I don't know, but she was with Vincent the entire time. Something about her felt off." A mysterious accomplice. The plot thickened. With Lily's help, I tracked down Vincent Blackwell to a high-end hotel downtown. James, despite my protests, insisted on tagging along. "You might need backup." "You're not exactly trained for field work, James," I retorted. "And you're not exactly subtle, Jess," he shot back, grinning. After a brief standoff, I relented. We staked out the hotel lobby for hours until Vincent finally appeared, accompanied by the red-haired woman from the photo. They headed for the elevators, and James and I followed at a safe distance. On the 14th floor, they entered a room at the far end of the hallway. We waited until the coast was clear, then I pulled out my lockpicking kit. "You carry that everywhere?" James whispered. "You'd be surprised how often it comes in handy," I replied. The door clicked open, and we slipped inside. The room was lavishly decorated, but my attention was immediately drawn to the desk, where the OptiShield prototype sat in plain sight. "Bingo," I whispered. Just as I reached for the device, the door burst open. Vincent and his accomplice stood there, both armed. "You've got guts, breaking into my room," Vincent sneered. "Too bad it's the last mistake you'll ever make." James, ever the quick thinker, grabbed a nearby vase and hurled it at Vincent's head. It missed, but the distraction gave me enough time to grab the OptiShield and dive for cover. "Run!" I shouted. James and I sprinted down the hallway, Vincent and his accomplice hot on our heels. We reached the stairwell and descended as fast as we could. By the time we reached the ground floor, hotel security had intervened. Vincent and his accomplice were arrested, and we handed the OptiShield over to the police for safekeeping. The next day, the story made headlines: "Detective and inventor foil high-tech theft." James, of course, milked the media attention for all it was worth, but as I looked at James, grinning ear to ear during a live interview, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. OptiShield was safe for now, but I knew this wouldn't be the last time we faced danger. In our line of work and life, adventure was always just around the corner. After the ordeal with Vincent Blackwell and the recovery of the OptiShield prototype, life should have settled down. James returned to his lab, diving into perfecting his invention, while I continued my work as a detective. For a brief moment, it seemed we could go back to our version of normal. But trouble has a way of finding us, or maybe we're just magnets for it. It started on an ordinary Tuesday night. I had just gotten home from the precinct, exhausted from spending hours chasing down leads on a counterfeit money ring. James was in the kitchen, reheating leftover lasagna while humming a tune slightly off-key. "Hey, genius," I said, dropping my bag on the counter. "Any groundbreaking inventions today?" "Not exactly," he replied, grinning. "But I think I've finally cracked the self-diagnostic feature on OptiShield. It'll be ready for market testing soon." I was about to tease him about his tendency to almost crack things when his phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at it, and his expression immediately darkened. "What is it?" I asked. He held up the screen. The text was from an unknown number. "You can't protect what you don't understand. Watch your back." My stomach clenched. The message was vague, but my instincts told me it wasn't an idle threat. Someone wasn't happy about James's invention, and given its potential to revolutionize security, it wasn't hard to guess why. "Have you received anything like this before?" I asked. James shook his head. "This is the first." I studied the text again, my mind racing. Whoever sent this knew about OptiShield, and seemed to imply that James didn't fully grasp the implications of his own creation. But what did that mean? Before we could dissect it further, there was a loud crash from the lab. We exchanged a glance, and without a word, we crept through the house, every nerve on edge. The lab door was ajar, and the faint glow of James's equipment illuminated the room. Inside it was chaos. Papers and blueprints were scattered across the floor, a chair was overturned, and one of James's monitors flickered ominously. But the most alarming sight was the shattered window and the figure climbing out of it. "Stop!" I shouted, raising my weapon. The intruder didn't hesitate. They leapt through the broken glass and disappeared into the night. James and I raced to the window, but by the time we reached it the street below was empty. What did they take? I asked, turning back to the lab. James was already rifling through his workbench, panic etched across his face. "The auxiliary drive," he muttered. "It has backup schematics for OptiShield." The next morning the precinct launched an investigation. The crime scene team dusted for fingerprints while I worked on tracing the burner phone number from the threatening text. Meanwhile, James was unusually quiet, staring at his computer as if willing it to reveal the intruder's identity. "Any luck?" I asked, setting a cup of coffee on his desk. He sighed. "Not yet, but I've been thinking if someone wanted to sabotage OptiShield, they'd need more than the schematics. They'd need the activation codes. And you're the only one who knows those, right?" James hesitated, then shook his head. "Not exactly. I shared them with one other person, Lily." The possibility that Lily, my best friend and James's longtime confidant, could be involved was unthinkable. But as a detective I knew better than to dismiss a lead, no matter how unlikely it seemed. I invited Lily over that evening under the pretense of a casual dinner. She arrived with her usual bubbly energy, oblivious to the tension in the room. "So what's the occasion?" she asked, popping a piece of garlic bread into her mouth. "Just wanted to catch up," I said, trying to sound casual. "By the way, James mentioned you've been helping him with OptiShield." Her eyes lit up. "Oh, yeah, it's such a cool project. He's a genius, you know. Do you know if anyone else has taken an interest in it?" I pressed. Lily frowned. "Not that I've noticed. Why?" I hesitated, studying her face for any sign of deceit. But if she was hiding something, she was doing an excellent job of it. That night I couldn't sleep. Something about Lily's reaction didn't sit right with me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing a piece of the puzzle. The breakthrough came 2 days later. I received a call from the precinct. A pawnshop owner had reported someone trying to sell a device matching the description of James's stolen auxiliary drive. The suspect was apprehended, and to my relief it wasn't Lily. It was a man named Roy Trent, a disgraced former engineer who had been blacklisted from the tech industry years ago. Under questioning, Roy admitted to stealing the drive, but claimed he was hired by someone else, a shadowy figure known only as Raven. The name Raven sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't just the ominousness of it was the fact that I'd heard it before. Raven was a notorious cybercriminal, known for targeting groundbreaking technologies and either selling them to the highest bidder or using them for their own nefarious purposes. If Raven was after OptiShield, we were in serious trouble. "We need to find this person before they come after you again," I told James. "Or worse," he replied grimly, "before they use my invention to break into something big." With the auxiliary drive recovered but the threat of Raven looming, James and I knew we had to act fast. We decided to use OptiShield's capabilities to our advantage, setting a trap that would hopefully lure Raven out of hiding. As we planned our next steps, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Raven wasn't just after OptiShield, they were after us. And as always, I was ready for the challenge. The trap was set. James and I worked tirelessly, using OptiShield to create a fake prototype with seemingly open vulnerabilities and irresistible lure for Raven. The bait was placed in a secure server farm downtown, disguised as an unprotected network, with police on standby and the system rigged to trace any intrusion. We waited in tense silence for Raven to take the bait. Hours passed. My nerves were frayed, but James was calm, focused. His fingers danced across his keyboard, monitoring the system for any signs of activity. Then it happened. A red alert flashed on the screen. "Intrusion detected." James's jaw tightened. "They're in?" I grabbed my phone, alerting the police to move in. James began tracking the intrusion, his code unraveling Raven's digital fingerprints. "They're trying to download the prototype schematics. I'm rerouting the signal." A location pinged on the map, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The police surrounded the building within minutes, but when we entered it was eerily quiet. Clear, an officer called out. James and I exchanged a look. Raven wouldn't leave so easily. We searched the warehouse, and in a small dimly lit room, on the screen was a live video feed. It was Lily. She was seated at a desk in her apartment, a headset on her, expression calm yet focused. She was typing rapidly, oblivious to our discovery. My heart stopped. "It's her," James whispered. I wanted to deny it, to scream that it wasn't possible, but the evidence was undeniable. Lily was Raven. Before I could process what I was seeing, her voice came through the speakers. "Well, you finally caught me. Took you long enough." I stepped closer to the screen. Lily. She smirked, her image pixelating slightly as if mocking the distance between us. "Why not you and James play hero while I'm stuck watching from the sidelines? Do you know how much someone would pay for OptiShield? How much they'd pay me? I've been planning this for years, Jessica." "We're your friends," I said, my voice breaking. "We trusted you, and I trusted you to be ordinary," she snapped. "But you couldn't even give me that. You always have to be the center of everything, the detective, the hero, the one everyone admires. Well, not this time." Before I could respond, the feed cut out. The officers began scrambling to trace the signal, but I knew it was futile. Lily had been one step ahead of us the whole time. James placed a hand on my shoulder, his expression pained. "We'll find her." I nodded, but deep down I wasn't sure if I wanted to find her as a friend or as a criminal I had to bring to justice. The chase wasn't over, but for the first time in my career I wasn't sure if I was ready for what came next.